when the prodigal son returns home again, with no shoes on his feet, and all battered by sin. His father looked down that old long dusty road. He brought him a ring and the very best robe.
Hi, my name is Tiffany, and I'm a recovering alcoholic. Just a little background. I suffered from anxiety my entire life. Mainly, it was social anxiety. I had a lot of trouble being around people. I didn't like anyone looking at me. Just large crowds would make me anxious, and just had a lot of general anxiety. The first time I drank, I was 15, and I would say by the time I was 18, I was an alcoholic. I used that as a way to cope with my anxiety. I thought that if I was drunk, that I would be able to be around people and that it would make it easier. But really all it did was make it a lot worse, because I would wake up from being drunk the night before, and I would feel guilt and shame and a lot of anxiety, and it was just a vicious cycle of drinking to cover up anxiety, and then being anxious and guilty that I had, drank the night before. And I just kept drinking to cover that up. And I made a lot of really bad decisions when I was drunk, just things that it wasn't what I wanted for my life, and it wasn't part of my morals. I just wasn't myself when I was drunk, and I hated that. I didn't like who I was, and, that just kept making me drink more. I blacked out all the time. I was mean and angry. I did a lot of things that hurt people and that hurt myself. It just wasn't me. It just wasn't who I wanted to be. It wasn't what I wanted my life to be. But I was just caught up in this cycle of just wanting to drink, to not be anxious, and then that was making me even more anxious. I was an alcoholic. I was just a mess. I was a mess, and I hated myself, and I just wasn't who I wanted to be. I was an empty shell of a person, honestly. I would stay up for days on end because I was afraid of what would happen if I slowed down even a little bit, even just to sleep. And when I did sleep, I would have panic attacks, and I would wake up screaming, having nightmares. And finally, I went to the doctor to get some help, and I remember she gave me a little piece of paper that had 5 questions on it, just really simple things. Do you have days where you want to cry? Do you have days where you're happy? Just 5 little questions, and from that, and talking to me maybe a couple minutes, she decided that I was bipolar, and she put me on a really high dose of Seroquel, and I was not bipolar. I had extreme anxiety, major depression, and I was using alcohol to cope with that. I was using alcohol to deal with my anxiety. So I already didn't need that type of medication. And then when I was drinking on top of that, it was a disaster. I was even more depressed. I was just about as low as I could get. And I wrecked my car. I couldn't keep up with my schoolwork in college, so I had to end up quitting. I just couldn't even hardly function, to be honest. I would sleep all day. When I wasn't sleeping, I was drinking. And, it just felt like I could not get out of that. I could not get out of that pit of just being depressed, being anxious, and drinking. And I kept telling everybody that I'm an alcoholic. It was almost a joke. I was drowning. I was drowning. When I got pregnant with my son, it was the best blessing because I did not drink the whole time I was pregnant, and I did not drink when I was breastfeeding. But when he got older, I started having those cravings again. I would buy little tiny bottles of alcohol and hide them in my house, and I would wait till he went to bed to drink, but I could just feel it. If I gave in, it was going to get bad again. And I didn't want that to happen. I, had a child, and I didn't want to go down that road again because I knew how miserable I was. So whenever my dad invited me to an Easter service in 2014, it was here at Lick Fork Church. I came with him, and I was hungover, and I drank the night before, but I came, and God met me there at that service, and I gave my life to the Lord, and He took away all of my cravings for alcohol. I didn't have a problem not drinking again. I was a whole new person. I loved my life, and it was really great for several years. I lived for God. I was just doing so well with my family and being a mom, and I ended up having a second child, my daughter, and I graduated from college, and we were just doing really well, and that was all because of God. He saved my life, because I know if I had stopped drinking, I would probably be dead. I was getting myself in situations that were dangerous and around people that did not want the best for me, and they had their own struggles too. And so anyway, several years I lived my life for God, and I was sober. But in 2017, my husband and I divorced, and I let the shame and the guilt of that keep me from coming to church. And I was convinced that my church family would not accept me anymore because I was divorced. And I was just convinced that no good Christian man would want me anymore. And I just let the guilt and the shame and, the lies that we tell ourselves keep me from serving God. And, I didn't think I was worthy enough. I didn't pray like I used to. I didn't read my Bible like I used to, and I didn't attend church, and I just didn't think I was worthy, and I think we all probably do things like that. Sometimes we don't feel worthy, and it was not true at all. My church family, they would have loved me no matter what. It was just lies I was telling myself, and totally not true at all. But I let that keep me from coming to church, and the farther away that I got from God, my anxiety started coming back. I was having a hard time being around people. All that social anxiety was coming back, just day-to-day anxiety. And I got myself into a relationship that caused me a lot of anxiety, and it wasn't good for me. And, if I had just stayed in church, it would have been okay. But I was gone for years. And in 2020, December, about a year ago, I gave up 6.5 years of sobriety and bought a bottle of whiskey, and I drank almost every night for 3 months. And it was just that same thing, that same vicious cycle of feeling like I needed something to help with my anxiety. But all the alcohol was doing was making me more anxious. I didn't like the way I felt when I was drinking, and I felt so much guilt and shame. I just kept thinking I gave up 6.5 years of sobriety. All this was for nothing. What am I doing? I hate feeling this way, And I didn't tell anybody, of course. That was the other part of it, just feeling the shame and the guilt and not reaching out for help. But finally, in March, I woke up from drinking the night before, and I just had enough. I was sick and tired of feeling the way that I felt. I hated waking up and feeling so awful about myself. I hated waking up and feeling that I wasn't worthy and that I was doing something. I didn't even want to drink, really. I just didn't want to feel the way I felt anymore. So instead of coming back to church, though, I met with a therapist, but thank God that she was a good therapist. She did not push medication on me like the doctor had before. She wanted to get down to the root of my anxiety, and she asked me, when was the last time you were happy? When was the last time you were not anxious? And I said, whenever I was going to church, whenever I was serving God. And she said, so when are you going back to church? And I just love that so much. It was just such a simple question. She wanted to know, when was the last time I was happy? And since my answer was, whenever I was going to church and serving God, so when are you going back to church? So I just love that. But, I was still struggling with being around people. So I kind of put it off, and I said, I'll go next month. So next month was June. And I said, I'll go by the end of June. And we made a plan, that was my plan. I was going back to church by the end of June. And there was, my friend's wedding was coming up too in June. And, we were doing baby steps. We were making a plan on how was I going to be able to go to that wedding and stay sober. And so we got it all worked out. We just had, just an idea of what we wanted to do, how I was going to stay sober for that wedding, and that I was going back to church by the end of June. But, my youngest brother, my baby brother, passed away on June 4th. And it was a complete shock. It was the hardest thing that I've ever been through. And when I got that phone call, the first prayer that I prayed was, please don't let this be true. I'll do anything. But when I knew for certain that he was dead, I prayed with my family that night, help us not to be angry or bitter. Help us to not be bitter about the loss, but to be forever grateful that we got that time with him that we did have. And I was able to speak at his memorial service. I delivered the eulogy in front of probably 200 or 300 people. And if God could give me the strength to stand up in front of all those people on the hardest day of my life, then I know that He would give me the strength to do anything. He could give me the strength to go to my friend's wedding and, celebrate that love and friendship. And he could give me the strength to come to church and rededicate my life to him. And that's what I did. So, it's just really ironic, I guess, how me and my therapist were making a plan on how was I going to be in front of all these people at a wedding. And, I would come back to church at the end of June. And I did go back to church in June, but I didn't know it was going to be with such a heavy heart, But I did. I rededicated my life to God. And I kept coming back to church and just pushing forward to a better relationship with Him. And I completed a 12-step program with my therapist and my peer support counselor. And I completed that program on a Tuesday in September. And she asked me, my peer support counselor asked me, what are you going to do next? You need something to keep you going forward. You need a program to go to. And I said, actually, next week my church has started the Arise Addiction Recovery Program. And, they're starting that next week. So that's something I can go to every week, So I went to that Arise meeting at Lick Fork Church, and I'm just so thankful that was there. That was meant for me, because see, God lines up things just the way you need them. Because that meeting was held in the fellowship hall of that church, and one of the last times that I saw my brother was in that fellowship hall. And I told him that I'd been drinking again. He was one of the very few people that I did tell. That was one of our last conversations. Was I told him I'd been drinking again and that I was going to get help. And I was kind of, beating myself up. I kept saying I gave up 6.5 years of sobriety, And he just said, you didn't give that up. Did you learn anything? But, when I walked into that meeting and it was in that fellowship hall, I just remembered I was here not long ago telling my brother that I needed help and I was going to get it. And, I did. So you see, God already knew whenever I said I was going back to church in June. He knew that I was going to be going back to church in June. And He knew when I told my brother in that fellowship hall that I was going to get some help. He knew where my help was going to come from. He knew I'd be attending those Arise meetings and that I would be back at my church at Lick Fork. And it's by the grace of God now that I'm a little over 8 months sober. And He's turned my pain into beauty. He's given me a whole new life. And I don't feel that shame and guilt anymore that I carried around for so long. Because He's forgiven me and I have forgiven myself. And I'm pressing on to something better. My kids have a mother who is not focused on alcohol, but I'm focused on living for God and being the best that I can be for them and for myself. And I'm just so thankful for that. And I know the agony of how hard it is to reach out for help. It is so hard to admit that you have a problem. It is so hard to admit I don't know what to do, and I don't know who to turn to. How hard it is to make that first step toward God, how hard it is to attend a meeting. But it is so much harder to live in that anxiety and live in that sin and live in that addiction. It is so much harder. And it's really hard to get to the root of why you're struggling in the first place, because I feel like addiction is because, most of the time you're struggling from something else. And it's hard to get to the root of that. And I know a lot of those roots run really deep, addictions that maybe in your family that go back generations. But I know a God who can break those generational curses and who can break those chains of addiction, because he did it for me not once, but many times. And I just think, like, what will it take for some of us to finally say enough is enough? And for me it was getting down to what I thought was my lowest point. And then my brother passing away. So I was lower than I thought I would ever be. And that scared me, because we don't know how long we have in this world. We just don't know. And I feel like, if I hadn't started going back to church and, seeking God and praying, I know that I would have been drinking again, just trying to deal with not only just everyday life but dealing with the loss of my best friend. But thank God I have an amazing church family and a support group, and these meetings that I've went to, they're just so wonderful. You can be yourself and you can talk about whatever's bothering you. There's no judgment. We're not perfect. We're not meant to be perfect. And we just need to ask for help. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of wisdom, because we cannot do it on our own. We just can't. And I'm happy, with the choices I make now, because I'm not anxious about the life I'm living. I'm just happy, that I'm sober and back in church, and I'm seeking a closer walk with God. And I have such a wonderful support system. I'm just so thankful for that, and I don't ever want to forget what God has brought me from. I'm so fortunate to be given another chance, because we don't know when our last chance is, And I just hope that if you are watching this and you are struggling with addiction, whatever that may be, addiction can be so many different things, but please don't feel like that you can't turn to someone. Please don't feel like that you have to be perfect. We all struggle with something, and just reach out, ask for help. I'm just so thankful for Lick Fork Church and these Arise meetings. And I'm just so thankful that God's given me another chance, and that I can be the person that I want to be and the mother I want to be, and who God wants me to be. And I'm just so looking forward to celebrating years and years and years of sobriety. And I'm so thankful for everything He's given me. But, just make that first step, because it is so much harder to live in that addiction. But just make that first step, and I'll be praying for you, whoever you are.
God knows who you are. And I thank you for listening to my testimony, and I thank God for all He's done for me.